Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back at you again with some more lore, and in today's video, boys and gals, we are talking about a very important thing. We are going to be talking about the death of the Great Crusade, but more specifically, what that really meant for humanity. So, strap on in, buckle up, grab yourself a snackaroo, and let's get settled down to talk about the final dip of humanity from the greatness and beauty of the far future into the grim darkness of its current present. So, the Great Crusade, as everyone knows, was Big E's big achievement and his big goal to reunite the entirety of humanity, restore the interstellar human empire, and maybe turn us into demigods? Not really sure. But, point is, he had a lot of shit to do and he wanted us to do it with him. Or be part of it, or something. It was a big thing, whatever it was. And of course, everything was going grand, until the heresy happened. When the heresy happened, the whole, project for humanity, everything kind of got thrown out the whack with the, big-ass war, and then Magnus breaking everything, and then, the Emperor kind of dying at the end a little bit, kinda, not really, it's a little weird. So, basically, everything kind of went shit. But when looking at the death of the Great Crusade, many people have their own interpretations and opinions as to when exactly the Great Crusade ended. Some people say it's when Big E made Horus War Master, some say it was when Big E back off, some say it's when the heresy happened, some say it was the end of the heresy. There's a lot of different opinions. But, in my opinion, there is one particular point that can easily be claimed as the true end of the heresy. And it is cemented in two facts which people cannot dispute are instrumental and are involved in the death of the Great Crusade. That being the massacres at Isstvan 3 and Isstvan 5. Now, you may argue which one of these truly represents the death of the Great Crusade and the beginning of the Horus Heresy, but regardless, both of them play a hilariously important part in it. So, for those of you who don't know, the Isstvan 3 massacre or the Isstvan 3 betrayal was when the traitor elements of the Lunar Wolves, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, and Death Guard basically culled their legion. They had understood which legions were loyal, i.e. loyal to the Emperor, and which were willing to side with the War Master. So because of this, they then sent all the loyalist elements onto the planet's surface and then bombarded them via orbit. However, a few key officers managed to understand what was going on, realize it, and then were able to lead some sort of counterattack or resistance or defiance. Now don't get me wrong, it was doomed from the start. But the fact of the matter was, what was supposed to be a quick, easy, clean, and deathless assault ended up becoming a down-out, knuckle-drag slaughter fight between the loyalists and traitor elements, and approximately 1/3 from each of the 4 legions was said to be lost, of course plus or minus 10,000 give or take. However, ultimately, all of this would allow for the Eisenstein under the command of Nathaniel Garrow to flee from Isstvan and alert the wider Imperium to Horus's betrayal. Now this was important, as remember, this was all supposed to be a hush-hush secret operation. It wasn't supposed to happen, nor was Horus ready to go and get the jump on. After hearing this, a retribution fleet, made up of 7 legions including elements from the Imperial Fist, would descend upon Isstvan and destroy the traitors. The first wave would consist of the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, and the Salamanders, with the second wave being the Night Lords, the Word Bearers, the Alpha Legion, and the Iron Warriors. 7 full-strength legions, or nearly full-strength legions, against 4 depleted legions would be an easy fight, regardless of who or what it was. However, during this time it was revealed that the second wave of loyalists turned out to be the second wave of traitors, and they ambushed the loyalist elements of the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, destroying most of their legionary forces. It is said that the Iron Hands lost about 80% of their marines, the Salamanders lost about 90%, and the Raven Guard approximately 70% of their strength. They were taken off the tactical board, and the remainder would be known as the Shattered Legions. And from there, the battle for the heresy would begin. So, let's talk about this more in a little bit of detail. Not exactly the actual combat of it, I may do a video about that later. Let me know if you guys would like that. A series covering the Isstvan Dropsite Massacre and the atrocity in full detail play-by-play. Also, read the books, pretty good. But basically what we're going to be talking about today specifically is what it meant. You see, when people read about the Isstvan massacres, they just think, oh, great betrayal. But they don't understand the true significance of it. We'll start with Isstvan 3. During this time, no betrayal had ever taken place. No Space Marine had ever turned on a Space Marine, at least in mass numbers. There had been 1 or 2 very rare instances due to demonic possession, Xenos corruption, whatever it may be, that Space Marines were forced to fight other Space Marines. But, ultimately, at the end of the day, it wasn't something that was even considered possible. So much so that merely the idea of suggesting it was cause for censure. So imagine this, you deploy onto the battlefield, your legions are ready, you're there in numbers with your brothers, to fight and to take the enemy apart. All of a sudden, You are bombarded by orbital strikes and are reduced to your number greatly, but by some miracle you manage to survive. You look around shocked and confused, ready to repel the enemy, and what do you see? You see your friends, your brothers descending and firing upon you. You see your Primarch, your father. He descends upon you in a violent rage, and he slaughters you. He slaughters your kin. He slaughters your brothers. Brother kills brother, father kills son, and that's it. It is such a traumatic and terrible experience that even for Space Marines, some of their psycho conditioning broke. You see, a Space Marine is meant to be eternally loyal and undyingly wavering to their Primarch. It is quite literally written in their very DNA. So, for your Primarch to betray you, everything inside of your very biological data is screaming that this is wrong. How then are we surprised that many Space Marines simply laid down and died? It is noted that amongst Isstvan III, the only legion who is said to readily respond and countercharge were the World Eaters. This was because throughout the entirety of Angron's reign, he had made it incredibly clear of his vitriolic disdain of his sons. His sons always knew that their father hated them, and this was the culmination of this hate. Now, that's called comfort. Many World Eaters did indeed just simply break, either being lost to the butcher's nails or break down mentally, because it's something that was unconceivable. It's literally something that was built into their DNA, and that's something that we don't understand. We as human beings, we love our parents, right? And some may argue we have a genetic disposition to love our parents. For Space Marines, it is quite literally built into their very DNA, injected into them via several organs. It is literally rewritten. Just put yourself in that situation. Like, really think about it, because this is something that we in 40k, the fandom, we don't really do. We don't really give 40k the time of day. Because ultimately, oh, it's 40k, haha, funny. Which, yes, a lot of it is batshit crazy. But in the moment, specifically the Horus Heresy, mainly because of the book series, it's all super serious. Therefore, we need to give it that air of sincerity to truly appreciate what it is. Your father, someone who you are genetically bonded by the ordinance of the Emperor of mankind to love and to obey and to follow unto death, is murdering you. With black rage in his eyes, he lashes out and gnaws at your flesh, he crushes your bones, and he renders your blood onto the floor. Think about that. Think about that just for a second. If your dad, all of a sudden, someone whom you loved and you had a pretty good relationship with, he pulls out a knife and tries to shank you, how are you gonna feel? Imagine how much more the Space Marines will have felt. Not only that, but for the first time, Space Marine on Space Marine combat was initiated. Now, whilst most people think that the Loyalists suffered, it was also the traitors. Remember, there were many Space Marines who didn't hate the Emperor, who didn't hate the Imperium. They didn't fall to chaos. They truly, genuinely thought that Horus had found out something vile about the Emperor, that the Emperor wanted to be a god? This went against everything that they were taught. The Emperor was a hypocrite. So this was an act of righteous retribution. But the minute they saw their loyalist brothers dying on the floor, the minute they realized that they were kinslayers, blood-soaked hands of their fathers, the minute that got into their head, it broke many of them. Many traitor Space Marines fell into that decay. They fell to chaos because of that, because they felt that they had nothing else. In fact, there is an argument, a theory, that the reason why chaos allowed this to happen was so that the Space Marines could break. Because a broken Space Marine is far more susceptible to chaos than a still strong Space Marine. It's something that is just completely unfathomable to us, because it's something that only Space Marines can feel. And the results are tenfold. The legions at Isstvan, the traitor legions mind you, fell from grace so terribly hard than any and all others. And their scars of shame are still visible till this very day, and the terrible fruit that was planted that day is ripe, petulantly so. But from Isstvan 3, let's talk about Isstvan 5. Isstvan 5 was very similar in the vein, but it was different. Mainly because those who were fighting Salamander's Raven Guard and Iron Hands, they knew who the traitors were. They knew what was going on. They understood everything, or at least they thought. You see, whilst the trauma on Isstvan 3 was the trauma of betrayal, the trauma on Isstvan 5 was the trauma of death. I need you to understand, Space Marines were used to suffering grievous losses, but not to this extent. The worst losses that a Space Marine Legion ever suffered are said to be the Dark Angels losing about a third to 50% of their strength during the Rangdan Xenocides. But the Rangdan Xenocides was an exception, and the first was meant to destroy monsters. This was expected of them, so it wasn't that much of a shock. But for Isstvan 5, the sheer terror of it was understanding the scale of destruction that was going to unfold. The whole promise of the Emperor was that there would be no more great destruction. There would be no more loss of technology, there would be no more loss of knowledge. We as humanity would undertake this great endeavor to pry ourselves back from the dark, malignant evil that had threatened us. And in doing so, we would unveil and unleash a new age. An age where there would be no war, no destruction, no disease, no torment, nothing. It would be perfection. The perfection of humanity made manifest in our civilization. That is what it was supposed to be. But for the legions on Isstvan to be utterly decimated, to be destroyed outright, such level of violence, such level of death was anathema to them. But more so, what was anathema wasn't necessarily the death and destruction, it was who was doing it and what they were doing. The idea that fellow legions would kill them and hunt them down. The idea that a Primarch could die. The idea that a whole legion could be destroyed in a matter of hours. It shattered them. Space Marines were built on very few core ideals. One of those ideals was the Primarchs as basically gods or demigods. The second was that the legion was indestructible. The third was the loyalty and brotherhood of Astartes. The fourth was the dream of humanity. And the fifth was their own desires. 4 out of those 5, and possibly 5 out of 5, were shattered beyond any and all repair. They were murdered in the vicious hand of cold blood. On Isstvan, they lost everything. We have accounts of many legionaries after the battle going insane, absolutely losing their mind and becoming suicidal. But not suicidal in the sense that we think of whether they want to kill themselves. Suicidal in believing that the only thing was left to fall to the enemy, especially amongst the Iron Hands. The Salamanders suffered the least out of this, the Raven Guard a little less so, but the Iron Hands specifically, knowing that their Primarch was dead, they were just absolutely lost. Lost beyond lost, lost without anything of understanding. So, what did many of them do? They gathered up in their battalion and they charged forward to kill, to murder, and to destroy. And ultimately they themselves would be lost in this endeavor. It was suicide, but it was suicide via rage, suicide via pain, something that was different, wrong, evil, some might argue. But ultimately, it is what they did. You know, it's a very interesting example to see how each legion reacted to trauma. In many ways, it's the 3 main responses that a human being can give towards trauma. Going from worst to best, we have the Iron Hands. The Iron Hands fully sunk into depression and denial. They were fully and utterly, wholesale lost in every single aspect of their grief. They forgot everything their father taught them. They were reduced to less than what they were. They completely changed. And in the modern day of Warhammer 40k, they were less than what they were. In the Horus Heresy books, there is a sample chapter, or an exoscript, whatever it may be, where Ferrus Manus talks to his sons, and he travels into the future, and he sees the Iron Hands and what they become. And he is so disgusted by this, that he says it is better for us to be wiped out than us to ever become this monstrosity. Even during all this, Ferrus Manus was trying to prove a point to his sons, and possibly to the Emperor, that being that the greatest strength that could be found is in that of humanity, hence why eventually he would want his Iron Hands replaced with human hands. But with the death of Ferrus Manus, at the hands of Fulgrim, the legion which the Emperor's children were closest to, it was something that broke them entirely. They responded with dejection, a loss of hope, depression. They gave up everything. They became living shells of their former selves. And in an attempt to cut away the pain, they sought to cut away their very humanity. For iron does not feel, iron does not think, iron does not want, iron does not hurt. There is nothing in iron. There is nothing. In fact, there is numbness, one might say, which is a terrible irony, as anyone who's ever dealt with any self-harm or depression knows that the reason why you commit self-harm is to feel anything other than that cold numbness. So it's an even further tragedy that the Iron Hands would seek out that numbness. They would seek that coldness, but so distraught and terrible were they that this was all that they could hope for. They truly are the worst case scenario when dealing with trauma. The Raven Guard are up next. The Raven Guard handled it a little bit better. Granted, they still had their Primarch, but they gave in to melancholy. They still did what they had to do, they still had a duty to do, but there was no hope in them. It wasn't as bad as the Iron Hands, where they fully gave up, but they understood and they tried to have a glimpse on reality. It's sort of that friend who struggles with depression a lot, but not to the point where it affects them. They don't do many self-harm. They keep a standard job. They are able to function well. They're able to smile. They're able to live their life. But there is that little bit of hollowness inside of them that prevents them from truly feeling happy. They're doing what they're supposed to do and they're trying to feel happy. But at the end of the day, there's just something that they're missing. They don't feel any joy, truly. And it's something that they've come to accept with sad melancholy. But just because they are suffering doesn't mean that everyone else around them has to suffer. It's better than the Iron Hands, but it's still tragic. But it's somewhat noble. They are willing to sacrifice everything for themselves, but they're doing it for other people. And they don't care if they are damned. They will not let their pain affect other people. Which again is noble, but flawed. For you to truly understand joy and life and happiness again, you need to be with other people. You don't remember what it's like, so you need somebody to show you. But if you're always hiding away from other people, how are you ever going to meet people to show them that joy? How are you ever going to enjoy life with other people if you choose to be alone? You may think that you're protecting people by choosing to be alone, but ultimately all you're doing is making them hurt. Because just as you are willing to sacrifice for them, they are willing to sacrifice for you. And in some cases, they're willing to sacrifice more, much more, for you than they are for themselves. And ultimately, we come to the Salamanders. The Salamanders handled it the best, and that was acceptance, but also hope. You see, the Salamanders understood what had happened to their legion, and they understood that Vulcan was dead. But they had this belief, this hope, that Vulcan lives. Vulcan will live. He will not remain dead. Now, while some may argue that's just denial, I would argue it's something a little different. While yes, there was some denial, I argued it's faith, but not hope. For those of you who don't know, the difference between faith and hope is this. Hope is the belief in something that can happen. Faith is the belief in something that shouldn't happen. Hence why no miracle is born of hope, but it is always born of faith. You can see with the conduct of the Salamanders, that even after Vulcan was supposedly dead, they didn't drop everything, they didn't fail, they didn't forget, they didn't lose themselves like the Iron Hands, nor did they seclude themselves like the Raven Guard. They did something different. They followed their Primarch's teachings as if he was still alive, possibly because they expected him to be alive. They were able to still function as human beings, purely because they understood that Vulcan might come back. And there were some who didn't, but they still decided to respect their Primarch's wishes, because they would honor his memory, and the best way to honor his memory is to doing by what he wants, such as Forge Father to Kill. Even after Vulcan had supposedly died, he still continued with his mission of safeguarding 7 artifacts for Vulcan and destroying the rest. The Salamanders had faith that Vulcan would return, that Vulcan lives, but ultimately, they didn't turn that faith into delusionality. They understood that having faith is only part of it. You must still do what you can do everything in your power, and that little bit that you can't, that you leave to faith. Now granted, I am a Salamanders fan and I identify with them very much, so this is indeed my interpretation of it, but when you look at how the Salamanders turned out compared to the Raven Guard and the Iron Hands, they did turn out the best, so they did have the best outcome, and thus the best way of dealing with it. Now whether or not that is the best overall, I'm not a psychologist, I can't say, but to me, it is. Because at the end of the day, Vulcan does live. And even if he didn't live in flesh, he will have lived in spirit. And that hope, that spirit, that fire, is what kept the Salamanders going. It's the one thing that the Raven Guard and the Iron Hands didn't have. That undenying faith, that stubbornness, that resilience, that determination to succeed, to win, regardless of the cost. That is what they had. And, ultimately, that is what led them onto their path. So, we talked about Isstvan 3, and we talked about Isstvan 5. And ultimately, I think that this is where the Great Crusade truly ends. Because the tenets that kept the Great Crusade alive for 200 years, the progress of humanity, the forgetting of old night, the throwing away of old barbaric practices such as religion, warfare, and strife, and the fraternity of the Space Marines, all of those things were completely, utterly shattered in the Isstvan system. To my opinion, It is the perfect point to say that the Great Crusade died there that day, because all the ideals died with it. And for the rest of the heresy and the aftermath of the Scouring and the 10,000 years into Warhammer 40k, the ideals of the Great Crusade remain dead. In combination with the Primarchs dying and most of them leaving, ultimately, the Great Crusade died that day, and the start point was at Isstvan. For the death may have dragged out all through the 7 years, you could say, but the first blade that sunk its malicious teeth into the heart of the Great Crusade was plunged at Isstvan. Not only because of all the death that happened, hundreds of thousands of Space Marines, but more specifically, the ideals that died. Flesh can be reknit, armor can be reforged, ammunition can be restocked, blades can be resharpened. But ideals? Spirit? Faith? Once these things are broken, they very seldom can be reforged. And that's something that we take for granted a lot. Warhammer 40k is funny, it's silly, it's bullshit, yes. But it also has very, very poignant moments of sincerity and seriousness. And those moments, when you give them what they deserve, they're some of the most best, most strongest, most impactful, most soul-feeling writing you will ever read in your life. For 40k is a tragedy, and a tragedy is a lesson of wrong. It's a lesson of what not to do, but it's also a glimpse into what could have been, into what if. And that is the greatest part of the tragedy and the most sad. Because, what if? Just, what if? But sadly, we will never know what if. For on the fields of Isstvan, men died, and their ideals died with them. And the promise and prosperity of the New Age was thrown away. For the galaxy burned in the fires of Horus's ambition. And when fire rages, only destruction may follow. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know down below, what do you guys think about this whole idea? Have you guys given 40k much thought in the Great Crusade? Have you ever really taken it seriously, or have you always just thought, haha, funny 40k orc nonsense? And if you have given it seriously, let me know down below. What is your most favorite moment in the heresy? The one moment that really made you pause? For me, it was when I was reading Scorched Earth, and at the very end, the librarian screams, "Vulcan lives." It's just the culmination of everything that he's been through, and ultimately, when faced with the tragedy and reality of it, he screams out in defiance, "Vulcan lives." He damns everyone and everything. His father lives, and he will fight and die for that fact. As a Salamander fan, it was arguably one of the best books I've ever read. It gave me chills. By the way, John Keeble, oh my god, he's a fantastic VA. Jesus Christ, I aspire to be like that. But let me know down below what was your favorite moment, and I want to say a massive thank you to you guys for watching, and an even bigger thank you to my members. Big shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. EddieV3 and Miss Withdraw of the Void. Big shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. RB20 Guy, and Mr. Corns Butcher. And shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Muslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, and Mr. Michael Hayeda. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Like, I love all of you guys for watching, but the fact that some of y'all give me money to do this, it's like, oh my lord in heaven. I really don't deserve it, but I sincerely appreciate each and everything that you guys do. So if you want to join up for the memberships, you get to help out your boy, but in addition to all that, you get a bunch of awesome benefits. Early access to these videos, behind the scenes stuff, snippets, sneak peeks, previews, progress updates, and if any major decision happens in this channel, y'all get a hand in it via some awesome votes. I know that a lot of the voting stuff hasn't really been happening, but I'm moving in like a week or two, so I'm pretty busy right now. I promise once it gets settled down, everything will come back. Also, you may have noticed a lack of super long form stuff and a lack of shorts. I'm just trying to put everything together and do it together, but once moving is done, back to normal. But remember, this will always be free, and you gotta do nothing. You just simply watching will be more than enough for your boy, and I will always love you no matter what. Mwah! Yes, I will. But ladies and gentlemen, I have been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank y'all all so very much for watching. Make sure to stay strong out there, boys and girls. And if you ever feel down or sad, make sure to talk to somebody. Trust me, the only person who's saying they don't want to talk to you is you. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers! Whilst 40k has some really great serious moments, god damn it, its funny moments are fucking dumb as shit, and god do I love it. Case in point, any fucking thing to do with their orcs, fucking magic war mushroom, motherfucker.